Three Righteous Mamas is a podcast brought to you by The Signal that is on a mission to transform our country. We tell the stories that matter, celebrate the power and hope of pissed off mamas who are building a better future for all of our children. Hi, I'm Muna Husseini.
And I'm Christina Sensun Ramirez.
And I'm Martha Pincoffs.
And thank y'all for joining us. We love being in conversation with all of our listeners. Please subscribe and leave us a review. We love to read them. And don't forget to visit our merchandise store on our site, store.3righteousmamas.com with the number 3 to order your gear now.
The hoodies are amazing. Not the hoodies, the sweatshirts, y'all. If you haven't gotten them, they're so soft. So
They are. You said it's like wearing cotton balls, and I agree.
Well, I'm still waiting for mine to come in the mail. Maybe they got delayed because of our lovely storm, but we're not going to talk about that anymore. We're excited to be chatting with Stephanie Wang-Breal today. We'll be talking about telling women's stories where women are centered in front of the camera and behind the camera. And speaking of the camera, y'all, I watched this rom-com with my daughter over the weekend. I can't remember what it's called.
Love letters with all my love. What is it called?
Yeah, with the Asian girl and all the love letters she sends. And then anyways, I don't want to give too much of the plot away, but do y'all like watching rom-coms?
Oh, I have always been one of my top genres has been romantic comedies. And I like really historical documentaries, and then just terrible, but I say wonderful rom-coms.
I'm a total sucker for rom-com. I mean, give me all of the cheese. I am here for
me
some
too.
Total escape. Yeah.
I love them. And this one was cute. And actually we're on the third one now. I've watched them all with my 12-year-old, and you know, the storyline is original in all of them, but my daughter friends were freaking out because she told them that she watched the show with, you know, her mom, and they were like, you can't do that. There's like kissing and, you know, stuff. And she was like, so what? And then I guess she realized like their friends don't talk about everything with their mom. You know, so backing up a little bit, when I was pregnant with my son, my daughter was 7 and she asked me where babies come from. So I got this book called It's Not the Stork, and we literally read it, and it just explains everything that is the birds and the bees, from like biology to like intimacy and having sex. And so yeah, like maybe people would consider that weird or awkward to talk to your 7-year-old about the birds and the bees and all of the scientific detail, but I loved it because it took all the awkward out of the conversation. And now it doesn't matter what it is. Like my kid feels comfortable coming and talking to me about it, and I can explain everything to her. And, you know, in this lovely age of internet and misinformation where our kids are hearing everything under the sun, like I would much rather be her source of information. But, you know, back to the movie, there were a lot of things
By the way, it's called, I found the title for everyone that wants to watch it. It's called To All the Boys, 2 P.S. I Still Love You. It's a wonderful.
My wife watched all of them and loved them. She was so sad when it was over.
It's adorable.
Well, you know, it wasn't just that it was a rom-com. I'm in my 40s now, and it was the first time I saw a teenage rom-com with an Asian girl as the main character that I could remember, right? She wasn't a side character. She wasn't a caricature of an Asian girl. She was a whole 3-dimensional character who happened to be Asian, and some of these cultural aspects are in there. So anyways, in addition to the story, I just super loved the representation. And I remember the first time even watching, for example, The Namesake, which was an Indian based, or I don't know, maybe some of the characters were South Asian, but I remember watching it in a theater and being like, oh my gosh, like Indian people on TV in a way that I relate to, because I've seen Bollywood, but that just feels so like Disneyland to me sometimes, where I'm like, I don't really relate on the screen. But one other random aside here, I feel like I'm going on a lot of tangents, but there was one scene in the movie where they go on a ski trip, and I'm not gonna lie, y'all, I broke into sweat.
You watched the old one. There's a new one out.
Well, we'll have to check that one
We're like
out too.
2 years behind. That's why there's PS2. I love Muna's like, I'm up on all the kids stuff. I really know what's out there. She's like, that was so 2018 or 19. What are you talking about? The new one is out. She's going off to college, not the one where she's just met the guy.
We watched all 3. Okay. I'm not that behind the times.
Okay. Well, when you said it, I was like, excuse me. Okay, can I say the best romantic comedy ever though? Ever is 10 Things I Hate About You.
That is a great one. It really is. I can see why you like that one.
Oh, it's like in my top 5 films of all times, probably.
It's like some really good angsty teen action.
Yeah, I feel for, you know what, I'm glad you get to talk to Misha about these things, because I just remember being a teenager, and you're right, like my information sources, my parents like let us watch movies, so it was like movies, never direct conversations, and then like really uneducated 7th graders being my, it was like we didn't use the internet back then. It was like, people that knew just about as much as I did pretending to really know what was happening. I'd be like, oh wow, they really know.
Wow. I do. I remember in 2nd grade, Elizabeth Ann, who sat behind me in class, like there was more open conversation happening in her class, because she became the source for like all things reproductive. And we would go ask her questions and be like, okay, Elizabeth Ann, what about this? What about this? And she would just like,
well, here's a question I have. Did you have sex ed in your schools? Because in mine,
did.
Because I went to school in Ohio, high school, there was actually a really good sex ed program. I remember like it was actually very informative. It wasn't abstinence only. They talked about like protection, birth control, condoms. They talked about all of that. They talked about like STDs and the biology of the body and stuff like that. It was really, really informative.
I had it in 5th grade. I was in private school, and like we did the thing where you roll the condom on the banana and like
practice,
talked about all the stuff. And we watched the birthing video, and that may be why I never wanted to give birth, because my 5th grade self was like, oh hell no, I'm not going to do that. No. That was effective sex ed.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think I remember going through sex ed in school. And I will tell you, my daughter came home. So 5th grade, she's riding the bus, and she comes home and she's asking me all these questions about porn, because apparently kids were watching porn on the bus and there were all these terms. And I was like, why must I have this conversation with my child? But then we had it, because I'd much rather her hear about porn from me than like, I don't know, like 10-year-old boys on the bus. But there's so much real life out there, and we don't always get to choose when our kids learn about these topics. And so, with that said,
Stephanie Wang-Breal is an award-winning filmmaker, commercial director, and co-founder of the independent production company Once in a Blue Films. Blowin Up, her 3rd feature-length film, had its world premiere at Tribeca Film Festival in April of 2018 and was awarded the Best Documentary Feature Award at the San Diego Asian Film Festival and the Society of Authors Award at the Film Des Femmes in Paris, France. She currently resides in Brooklyn, New York, with her son and daughter. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. We are excited to have you. And we start every podcast with the same question, which is this. How did your mom or mother figure shape the way that you engage with the world?
So that's a great question. And it's really sort of apropos to my life right now, because my new film project is actually called Florence from Ohio, and it's in development, and it's about my mom. And so it's sort of an homage to her and sort of all the things that she accomplished as an immigrant woman who came to this country the year I was born. My parents are from China, Shandong, my mother, Shandong province, and my father, Hebei province. And then they met in Taipei. And then they came to Canada, where my dad did his residency. And the only place they had ever visited in our country was Youngstown, Ohio, where my dad did a rotation. And the firm that he was working with said, we would love for you to come and join our practice after you graduate. If you can pass the Ohio State boards, we would love to offer you a pathway to becoming a partner. And my parents thought this was a great place to raise a family. And it was the only place they'd had ever been in the country. And so they decided to move there. And then I was born. So my mother was a housewife. In my interviews with her friends and colleagues, one of my parents formed a Chinese school in the town. My mother is now known as Mrs. Mahoning County. She was a regular guest celebrity chef for the Youngstown, Good Morning Youngstown TV show. She ended up being a huge community organizer. She was voted president of the YWCA when I was in school. So she did all these things outside of the foyer, but they were volunteer work, and like, I think that as women, that was the pathway out of the household. And so I think that, we so often, our generation celebrates our fathers and the patriarchy and all that they've done for us because they went to work. They, put money on the table. And even though my mother isn't, a trailblazer in terms of she's like the leading CEO of this tech company, she created community bonds and cultural liaisons between China and Ohio. That was just incredible, so she did what she could with what she had. And so in many ways, this film is like making sure that what she's done does not disappear, because I think that we so often write down men's histories and not women's histories. And this is my way of celebrating her life, but also questioning, like, our model minority status and how we both performed our culture to find acceptance in a community. So that's the long answer to your question. So, I mean, I think that my mother has definitely influenced me, and just in terms of, I'm a big cook. I was taught to cook Chinese I grew up on 5-course Chinese meals.
Oh my God.
That sounds very
So
nice.
yeah, I mean, like, being a vegetarian sounds like a lovely thing, but when you grow up with such rich, Chinese food that's been braised beef, braised noodles, all that stuff that's been cooked for days, like, I don't know how to survive without that. And so I'm definitely, like, she's definitely influenced me in my cooking, and like me giving those traditions to my children, and they love Lao Lao in Chinese. That's what she's called, the maternal grandmother. And then she's also influenced me in terms of, like, just sort of, I think my films are her influence on me in terms of the way that I'm getting involved with communities that aren't my own, and getting involved in them in a real authentic way that's not just for show, and just trying to really understand them and bring their issues to light in the way that I know how to, which is through film.
I love that. And what's your mama's name?
So my mother's Chinese name is Huang Jingying, and the chosen English name that she chose for herself is Florence.
So Florence from Ohio.
So I loved hearing that. So my mom is from Mexico, and I was born in Perry County, Ohio. So in a really old coal mining town. So I'm sure you and I could talk forever about like what it's like to be the only one that, like the only Mexican family I knew was my mother, like that was it. And then it was just us. So I'm sure there's a lot of similarities.
Yes.
Very, very similar culture, like white working class.
Yes. And I remember Perry. I mean, I did the speech and tennis teams, and I would travel and we played Perry. Yeah. Definitely very similar.
A lot of camaraderie. Yeah. So I'm wondering, how your parents reacted when you said, I want to be a filmmaker. I want to become a documentary filmmaker. Were they supportive? Were they nervous about it? I mean, as immigrant parents too, what were their thoughts?
I think that I never said that I wanted to become a documentary filmmaker to them. I said that I'm going to go and work in this thing and this thing, because I didn't know that I could become that. it was just, I wanted to make movies. I didn't know how. I didn't study film in college. And I just, like, the only way that I could do it was like having legitimate jobs for them. And so my first job out of college was at CNN. And so like, oh, CNN, we know that name. That's okay. You'll do that for some time and then go on to graduate school. So I don't think that I ever declared that because it wasn't something that I knew I could really do until I just did it.
Mm. And
But
how,
to this day, there's still like, you know, you suffer. You chose a very challenging, suffering life.
it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of grind to tell these stories that otherwise probably wouldn't be told.
Yes. Yes.
Earlier in talking about the documentary and homage to your mother, right? You said something, we don't write down women's history, we write down men's history. And telling our story is so important. You know, having women centered in the story is not common. And then having a woman like yourself, an intersectional identity behind the camera, even less common, right? And so when you make these films and you're behind the camera, when you're doing this work, from your point of view, how is your storytelling different, and why is it important to have that representation behind the camera?
So that's a great point that you bring up, because for this film, I'm not just behind the camera. I'm also performing my mother's past life.
Oh, wow.
So it's part performance, part documentary, part fiction. So there are stories that we have of her life that I don't have VHS archive. So, and also, so just another note, just another lens for this really crazy story that I'm trying to do. My mother wore St. John knit suits for all her outward facing events. And this whole project started because I was home for the summer for 4th of July, and I was helping her clean out her basement. And I found all of these old St. John knit suits. And of course, she wanted me to try them on. And I did, and they fit me perfectly. And she was so happy. Like, finally, I looked like the woman she wanted me to be, you know? I looked 20 years older. But so like how, you know, and I understood by putting on that suit how powerful she felt. So I felt like this was a great visual gateway to understand how she performed her culture, but also how it wasn't just a performance, it was a power play, you know? So going back to your question about, you know, how important it is to tell these stories, you know, I'm doing something completely different this time. So I don't know how it's going to work out, but I'm hoping that um, in the long run, like my mom still doesn't know I'm performing her yet. I've also had a custom made wig because she had a perm, a fro, to resemble her, and all of that footage will be shot in Super 8. So it'll look archival.
Cool.
So
That's going to be amazing.
So it's going to be like sort of, for me, it's going to be like a comedy as well, like a mother-daughter comedy of us trying to figure out her life and me sort of sleuthing around, trying to understand how she did all these things in a very artistic way, and her questioning my artistic intentions and why I'm doing this. So I think like I just want to do something that is showing us and how we really are as these Chinese women who, you know, forge different paths because of our circumstances.
Mixed Up, a podcast for mixed race people everywhere and for anyone looking into deeper insight on race and identity. Hosted by sustainability consultant and creative director Emma Slade Edmondson and Nicole Ockrand, writer and co-founder of the Creator Union. The show is about straddling two worlds and multiple identities. Now more than ever, it feels like people of mixed heritage are seeking out their space to talk about their lived experiences. But despite searching, we could find very little to relate to. We decided to make something we could have appreciated hearing.
And I'm just sitting here thinking, in my life, I haven't seen anything even similar to that anywhere, whether it's in film and documentary, and what we see in that representation matters so much. I remember watching a commercial 2 years ago where there was a girl in a hijab the scarf, and she was just a photographer in the commercial and nothing else. And I thought that's awesome because she just happened to be wearing a scarf and was taking pictures, and like that's all you noted about her. And I don't know if anyone else cared, but it made a big difference to me because I'd never seen that before. And so um, I'm just glad that you're out there telling these stories. And we actually want to talk to you about Blowing Up, which is an award-winning documentary you made, right? And so here's a description. From within a broken criminal justice system, a team of rebels works to change the way women arrested for prostitution are prosecuted. And so how did you choose to tell the story?
It's so funny to hear the synopsis read back to me, the log line, because now, like in these times, working within a broken criminal justice system, like, back in 2015 when I started this project, that was like, no one was really talking about it as much. And now, like, it's just course.
Right.
Of course. So sorry, just to note that. So what brought me to this story? Why did I choose to do this? So my two previous films, my first film was called Why Ni Mommy, I Love You Mommy, and it's about a Jewish family who adopted an 8-year-old girl from China and sort of their understanding of transracial culture and identity and family. And then my second film was about the foster care system, because people told me after seeing my first film, like, you need to look into the domestic foster care system and how messed up it is. And I was like, oh, I just like spent a lot of time in this space. I'm not sure if I can handle it again. But then I started looking into it and I realized that so many parents are actually trying to get their kids home. And that is a story that hasn't been told. So I was interested in trying to do it that way. But that was a really hard film to make, I have to say. Like, experiencing their vulnerability and these families, the just societal challenges that they were experiencing, like, really affected me in a very personal way. And it gave me a real understanding of the foster care system in a way that I was like, okay, if I were to do something in this space again, I would choose to do it differently. So then when I heard about this court and was serving those two populations, Asian undocumented women, as well as, a lot of the domestic workers were Black, Latina youth, transgender youth coming from the foster care system, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And it's being led by a Japanese female judge. Like, it has all the ingredients of things that I want to showcase and sort of understand. And then observing the courtroom and seeing that not only was it serving these populations, but doing it in a different way, but it also had like this team of women who were doing it. I mean, like it was just a courtroom full of women. And I think that when we think of the criminal justice system, we've always thought of it as a room full of men.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like there was an opportunity here to show what happens on this like really small scale when women come together to try to improve a system that is deeply, deeply faulted and wrong. And, as Eliza says in the film, like, we hate this court too. We don't want you here. Like, and that was one of the criticisms that I got of the film often was like, you're, promoting this courtroom. You're making this courtroom seem like it's the solution. I was like, well, I'm sorry if that's the perspective you got. I didn't try to do that at all. I tried to show all angles. Because as Judge Sarita says, like, it's an imperfect system. It's not the solution. So, it's a hard film to make. It's a hard subject matter to tackle. Because it's so divisive in terms of the feminist dialogue and discussions. But I just felt like there was an opportunity here to document the space in a way that sort of elevated the work and also the women's stories who were, at the center of this courtroom.
Did you know that all of the folks involved in the courtroom were women, or was that something that was shared with you and then you went and explored it? I guess I'm just trying to understand when was the moment that you had this realization that, hey, there's something different going on here?
So with all my work, I spend about 6 to 12 months researching it and visiting and spending time in the space without a camera so that I can build relationships and access and get permission to film inside. So I visited a bunch of courts and I kept coming back to that court. So seeing them at work, and also it helps me then determine how can I visually bring this space to life. what do I want to capture? How do I capture it? Is it possible to capture this? So I get to viscerally experience it and try to figure out ways to get audiences to feel that same way that I felt the first time I walked into the court.
I got to, I definitely felt that when I watched the movie. Like I felt the care in the relationship with all of the women that really worked together to do the best that they could in a system that is not built to deliver justice. But I was so interested in the way that Judge Sarita and Eliza and the women that were there being prosecuted, how all of those forces seemed to really desire the best outcome for the women and work for that. And I think that is really rare. And you say that you said that you looked at a bunch of other courts, and I would imagine you could speak to what the magic is about like that specific setup.
Yeah, so the other courts, there wasn't the same amount of collaboration going on. The vibe was different, like the judge definitely was not as lenient, I would say, as Judge Sarita, even though she probably wouldn't love that I just said that, but like as open and as like trying to have conversations with the women. Judge Sarita always addressed them in the courtroom. And that kind of friendliness and openness I just wanted to show the humanity involved, and there wasn't that in the other courtrooms. It was very procedural. And so that's also why I wanted to do this space. But also, Judge Sarita, Liza, Kim Affronti, the prosecutor who was open to us filming as well. Because I mean, that was another thing, is Judge Sarita said I could come into the court, but then I had to get everyone's permission individually. So every morning before court started in session, I would give a little speech to everyone in the courtroom in English and in Mandarin, because I also speak Chinese, like just telling people what we're doing here and that everyone has a right to refuse to participate. And some days we'd walk away with 1 or 2 people only letting us film them. So yeah, like every filming day was a negotiation of access.
I bet that was hard. And just so listeners know, and you should definitely watch Blowin Up. Where can they watch Blowin Up right now?
They can watch it on Amazon Prime right now for free.
Perfect. So everybody needs to go watch it on Amazon Prime. It's really good. It is a hopeful movie about the justice system in some ways. But the women who are being prosecuted for prostitution are not adjudicated straight to jail. They are actually, what you do is you watch a group of women work together to try and help put what support is available to them to these women. So
right, that's an important note, is that if this court didn't exist, they would be sent directly to jail. Yeah. That's why, like, people who complain that this system shouldn't exist at all, I'm like, yes, but it is a step in the right direction. There shouldn't be a step in the right direction at all, but it's better than just sending them straight to jail.
Earlier, you said you spend 6 to 12 months researching before you make a film. That tells me how vested you are in the integrity of the story and the relationships you build in being able to represent the story in an authentic way. Why do you feel this responsibility? Something is driving you to do this work, which, earlier you were maybe joking, said it's very difficult, right? To tell these stories in a certain way. Why is that important?
So I think that, and something that it's being discussed more often now is just how, as the storyteller, we have all the power. That's it. Like, I don't have a story without the people participating. And so don't take that lightly. It's a huge privilege to be invited into these people's homes. Thanks to my work, I have gotten to experience all parts of New York City and been invited at dinner tables by so many different families because of the work that I do. And, you can't break bread with a community or with a family or an individual without letting them get to know you too first, I think. And so making that relationship, I think, establishing that relationship, I think just makes it, when we do bring the camera into the room or into a space, it's not the sole gaze. The relationship still exists and the camera's there to document what they're going through, but it's not the elephant in the room. It takes away the power, I think, of the camera in a way, even though it's still very powerful, definitely. So for me, and I've learned this responsibility through the work that I've done. I mean, my first film I shot, directed, produced, did the sound. I was like a one-person band. And I learned the responsibility through that film. And not just the responsibility, but like sort of the ethics, because I was also in that film in terms of my voice. The little girl didn't speak English. And so I ended up, whenever the coordinator for the adoption agency wasn't around, I ended up translating between mother and daughter. So my voice, so I broke the fourth wall, which is what they call it in documentary filmmaking, and entered the story as well. I'm never physically in it, just my voice is in it. So, going through that process and questioning my role and what I was doing and how that changed the story, was a big deal for me in terms of how I started to figure out what is my role in this.
The Manifesta podcast explores the career paths of ambitious women and how they charted their own unique path to success. Each episode, we have fresh and inspiring conversations with successful women about their careers, the lessons they've learned along the way. We also have spirited discussions about issues such as managing your fertility, balancing career and home life, how to know when it's time to quit or start a new job, salary negotiation, and why we should all care about childcare policy.
I'm wondering for you too, is like thinking of that responsibility, but also thinking of your unique role of being a woman of color director. I'm wondering, as you were like trying to plot, you said you didn't even know that you could become a documentary filmmaker, that you knew you wanted to work in, I guess, news or storytelling, and then eventually meandered your path towards documentary filmmaking. Were there women of color that inspired you, documentary filmmakers, or was it really lonely in the beginning when you started out on this path? Like, how did you overcome that challenge of not having, I'm sure, a ton of visible role models, or not enough?
Yeah, no, I wasn't inspired by any particular individual. I was inspired by the storytelling, different stories, different films. But I have to say that the documentary community is very generous. I got my first grant for my first film from this organization called Chicken and Egg Pictures. It's run by three women, Judith Helfand, Wendy Ettinger, and Julie Parker Bonillo. And they started this fund to help other women filmmakers start their filmmaking career. And they didn't know me. They've never heard of me. And I was a finalist, and they invited me to their house to meet with them to make sure that I was real and I was legit. And I was, I think, 8 months pregnant. So I waddled in and we just had a lovely conversation. And then they were my biggest cheerleaders. And they have been one of my biggest cheerleaders. They've supported all of my work since then. And they introduced me to people that they felt could help me. They introduced me to my mentor today, Jean Chen. She's an editor, producer extraordinaire. She produced 76 Days, which is shortlisted for an Oscar right now. As well as like 5 other films that like were at Sundance this year. But I have to say, like, even though I didn't know anyone coming in, once I entered, I have to say that the community has been very warm and generous. And I think that's because we're all struggling and we know the struggle is real, and how can we help each other to make the struggle less rigorous?
So before you joined us, we were talking about romantic comedies, and because we were, talking about how they are sometimes sex education for our children. And I was saying my 2 favorite genres are romantic comedies, and then I love documentaries. Like, I just consume documentaries all the time. And what I love about documentaries, this person that has worked a lot in as an organizer in social justice spaces is that documentaries are this incredible tool of storytelling that have exposed big challenges that otherwise, people were working on, but they weren't really brought to the light for the public, the greater general public or legislators to see until a documentary film did that. We think of some that come to mind, like, obviously there's Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth, Super Size Me, and there's a bunch of other ones. But I'm wondering for you, like, what do we do so we can continue to support documentary film to tell all the stories that need to be told? Like, I can't wait to watch the film you're going to make about your mom and like sit down and watch it with my own mom. But, I have a couple friends that are documentary filmmakers, and it's a really rough, hard road to tell all of these stories. And even more so when you're a woman of color that's telling stories through a different lens than oftentimes the folks that are purchasing or financing these films come from.
Yeah. I think that, one thing that I find interesting right now is with the documentary form, it's very much a social justice bent, which I think is great because it does, like you said, get across a message in a way that maybe lay people might not really know the nuance of the situation or the issue, and the people who are actually changing things and or trying to change things. But I also think that, for me, I feel like so many young people think documentaries are just like talking heads telling people how to think or what's actually going on. And I want people to understand that the documentary form is really much bigger than that, which is why, my project with my mom, it's actually been really hard to get funding because people are like, it's not this social justice film. It's not this kind of film. Doesn't fit into a box. And I want viewers or audiences to be really also appreciating films that don't fit one box. And that as women of color as well, like as an artist of color, I just feel like I am expected to just tell Asian American stories that are dealing with the trauma of immigration or the trauma of identity. And this has a little bit of that, but it's also like an artful, visionary, like comedy, So I'm really being challenged with this film. I've had really hard time financing it because people don't know where to put it.
Yeah.
And so I really challenge all listeners to find films that don't fit that form and see what it's like to see a different kind of documentary. I mean, I can definitely recommend a bunch that are so form pushing and different and just take you into a world in another weird, wacky way that's so wonderful. It's beautiful storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
We would love to get that list from you and share it with our folks, because I think that I mean, whenever you're pushing into something entirely new and defining your own space, both like in your being and how you're telling the stories, but also the like actual way that the story is going to take shape. It sounds like so charming and delightful, and I can't wait to see it. And like, it's going to be somebody brave and visionary who can write the check to help you make it. Because I mean, we all need to see the St. John suits and the wigs and the like. I need to know why Florence? Like, why is her name Florence? But all of that, it's magic. It's magic. It's magic what you do.
I'm also looking forward to the perm. It took me back to, what was that, 1989? As you were talking about how it's been hard to find this funders for this film, it just makes me think about how everything is just so purposeful nowadays. Everything, my daughter got to talk to a previous guest and asked him, as it comes to climate change, like, what can I be doing? How do I tinker more? How do I learn so I can help with problem solving? And Saul said, listen, just do art, like use all sides of your brain. And then if we think about schools and funding and how art and music programs are getting cut, we're losing a lot of the potential because of how we think about everything having to like fit in a box and be purposeful. And one of the things we like to ask all of our guests as it pertains to like our listeners and their children is like, how do our listeners take what we're talking about and apply it home, right? So when it comes to art and storytelling and not necessarily having to like check all the boxes. What are your thoughts when it comes to that? Because there's no formula when it comes to filmmaking. There's no formula that you can follow when it comes to like building those relationships to then represent an authentic story that needs to be told, right? Like, what are your thoughts there when you think about our parents who are at home with their kids and building this world? Because we need these stories to build the world for our future.
I just think right now it's such a hard time for parents. I mean, it just with this remote learning, I mean, it's been just such a challenge for me to continually be innovative.
Mhm.
You know, I think that so much of the fun and joy of my work has been taken away from me,
Mm.
and the fun and joy of their lives has been taken away from them. That we're just living in strife and on our screens. So I think that in this time particularly, it's really challenging to continually be innovative. I mean, one thing that I do with my kids a lot is we watch old movies, and I really limit their screen time. I'm really worried about their mental health and the amount of time that they look at screens right now and what that's doing to their ideas of self, ideas of virtual reality, ideas of um, social interaction. So, you know, I do try to give them access to things that I know they're not getting through their screens or through their education. Whether that's like watching old Charlie Chaplin films or watching Minari. I would definitely recommend Minari if anyone hasn't seen it yet. It's a beautiful film. My 7-year-old couldn't read the subtitles, so I would just whisper in her ear the dialogue.
So
But they
sweet.
both loved it, you know, so much. They were so moved by the realness of that story. Um, but before the pandemic, I mean, I took my kids to the museum and to plays a lot. And you know, at the beginning of the pandemic, I tried to be that amazing parent, and we had art class every day, and we would work on something and we journal together. And, you know, all of that has petered out. I'm just, you know, I'm their piano teacher, I'm their cook, I'm a single mom, you know, I just trying to do it all, and it's just exhausting.
Yeah, we have all been through that of just the exhaustion of this time. We were joking before that our escape is the bathroom, but sometimes it's like you can't even get in the bathroom without little fingers coming underneath the door. My son constantly says he wants to help me when I go to the bathroom. You know, there's just like no space right now. So it's incredible that you're even able to still be thinking about the films that you're making while we're in this space, closed off from so much. And you know, your film Blowing Up is so good, so brilliant. Um, and we're just grateful that you told that story, because I think about all the people that that story reached that maybe had never thought about it or seen it from that perspective. Um, you know, and you said your mom was a chef, and I think of film, like documentary film, as cooking. It's like you can have the same ingredients, but you can make a totally different dish that tastes totally different. You wouldn't even know that it was made from the same ingredients based on the chef. And I think about documentary film in that same way, how you said it's like the creativity, the artistic nature of it, that we can all see the same story, but depending who's telling it, we're going to experience it in a totally different way. And the world needs to experience more the way you see it, because it's just been an incredible way to see potential for change on a really hard subject that otherwise maybe people wouldn't see. So thank you for the creativity and the heart that you put into this work. And I think there's a lot for us to reflect and sit on about how we do that as well with our own kids. So, and nurture that. So thank you.
Thank you.
It makes such a difference who's behind the camera, what story they tell. And I don't know that I ever really appreciate what a director and a producer does for the film. I just kind of brainlessly watch like what's on my TV, but there's so much more that goes into it, especially if someone is spending 6 to 12 months to research the documentary they put together. I had never even considered that. So of course the storyteller matters. The narrator can't all be David Attenborough.
Although he's wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. I agree. I heard so much resonance. It's funny because I loved that she started out talking about her mom and the way that her mom built community in all of these different sort of settings. And like, as I heard her telling how she goes through the process of discovery for a film, it sounded a lot like those relationships that were modeled for her by her mom and probably her dad too. But like, I love the respect with which she entered the room, and the result is really evident in the piece of art that she produced, because it is really intimate. There is real access and trust in the story that's you just don't get to see all of the time. And I think that is unique to, you know, her flavor of everything that came before. So I love it.
Now I have a million more documentaries after we get this list to watch, because I have watched every rom-com and documentary I think I can find, and I need a new list. So this is great.
This is great.
You know, the last question that Stephanie answered when she was talking about herself and how when the pandemic started, you know, before that they were going to museums and plays. And then as the pandemic hit, then she was at home and she was doing art class and journaling. And now we're a year in and she's tired. And aren't we all?
Oh my God.
And mamas don't get to turn it off. Our babies are still there. You know, I used to go to a parenting coach, Carrie Conti would say, like, you can't charge your kid's battery. Like, they plug into you if you're empty. And so, like, we don't have a choice. Even if we're empty, our kids plug into us, right? And mamas keep the world turning. And that's a testament to her, right? Like, even if she's doing her job and telling these stories and being so thoughtful and so caring about, you know, she said that she gets involved in communities that are not her own. And then she wants to tell their story in an authentic way. And that takes work and it takes care and consideration. Then you go home and you deplete yourself with your kids. And then you wake up in the morning and you do it again. And I just thought, wow, what a testament to this righteous mama who's showing up and doing it every day, not just for her kids, but ours. I think that's a beautiful thing.